I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I used to practice emergency medicine at Mercy General Hospital in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or at least I did, until I submitted my resignation 4 months ago. Most people in the ER called me Dr. VR during my 18 years there, and I thought I'd seen everything you could imagine: multiple vehicle collisions, drug overdoses, cardiac arrests, gunshot wounds, every kind of medical emergency that could walk, run, or be carried through our doors. I've pronounced hundreds of people dead, held families as they received the worst news of their lives, and fought to save lives when everyone else had given up hope. But what I'm about to tell you about happened during the lowest point of my life, when I was working the graveyard shift as a custodial worker at Moonrise Memorial Gardens, a funeral home on the outskirts of Santa Fe. It's the one night that made me question everything I thought I knew about death, consciousness, and the boundaries between the living and the dead. It's the reason I can never look at my medical degree the same way again, and it's why I wake up at 3 a.m. most nights, remembering what I witnessed in that basement morgue, the perfect storm of destruction, to understand how a board-certified emergency physician ended up mopping floors in a funeral home. I need to take you back to the spring of 2021. That's when my carefully constructed life began to unravel in a series of catastrophic events that seemed almost orchestrated in their precision and timing. It started with what should have been a routine trauma case on March 15, 2021. A construction worker named David Reeves was brought in after falling from scaffolding at a job site downtown. Multiple injuries, internal bleeding, but nothing we hadn't handled 1,000 times before. I was the attending physician, and we followed every protocol perfectly. The surgery went well, post-op looked stable, and David was transferred to ICU for monitoring. 3 days later, David Reeves died from what the autopsy revealed to be a rare drug interaction between his prescribed pain medication and an over-the-counter supplement he'd been taking for months, something that should have been caught in routine medication screening. Except David had never mentioned the supplement to anyone, not the paramedics, not the intake nurse, not me. It was a 1 in a million scenario, but the family's attorney painted it as medical negligence. The malpractice lawsuit was filed on April 2nd, 2021. By April 15th, my malpractice insurance company decided to settle rather than fight, which legally protected them but essentially branded me as a liability in the medical community. My reputation, built over nearly 2 decades of spotless emergency medicine practice, was destroyed overnight. While I was dealing with the legal fallout, my personal life was imploding in equally devastating ways. My partner of 12 years, Dr. Rachel Chen, a psychiatrist at the same hospital, had been growing distant for months. I thought it was stress from work. We were both pulling extra shifts during the COVID-19 pandemic, dealing with unprecedented patient loads and emotional exhaustion. On May 8, 2021, Rachel sat me down in our kitchen and explained that she'd been having an affair with a colleague for 8 months. "Elena," she said, her voice clinically detached in the way that had once been comforting, but now felt like ice. "I haven't been happy in this relationship for years. The lawsuit just made me realize I can't keep pretending." She moved out that weekend, taking half of everything we built together, including our 2 cats and most of our mutual friends. The house we bought in the foothills, with its panoramic views of the Sandia Mountains, suddenly felt like a mausoleum of my former life. The final blow came in June, when Mercy General's administration, citing ongoing legal complications and potential institutional liability, placed me on indefinite administrative leave pending the resolution of my malpractice case. It was professional death by bureaucracy, technically not a firing, but effectively the same result. My income stopped, but my mortgage, student loans, and legal fees continued. By August 2021, I was facing bankruptcy. The house went up for sale, but the real estate market was sluggish, and I couldn't afford to keep making payments while waiting for a buyer. I moved into a studio apartment in a complex that advertised flexible lease terms and no credit check required, code words for desperate people in temporary situations. Finding work in the Valley of Death, my brother Carlos had moved to Santa Fe 5 years earlier to escape what he called the rat race of corporate consulting. He'd taken a job as the general manager of Moonrise Memorial Gardens, a family-owned funeral home that had been serving northern New Mexico for 3 generations. When I called him in September, broke and broken, he listened without judgment as I explained my situation. "Elena," he said after I finished my story, "I can't offer you much, but I can offer you something. We need someone for night maintenance, cleaning, security, basic upkeep. It's $16 an hour, midnight to 8 a.m., 6 days a week. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and it might give you time to figure out your next move." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 18 years fighting death in emergency rooms, and now I'd be working in a place where death had already won. But I needed the job, and frankly, I needed the isolation. The thought of working nights, alone, away from the judgment and whispers that seemed to follow me everywhere, felt like a gift. Moonrise Memorial Gardens sits on 15 acres of high desert landscape, about 20 miles northeast of Santa Fe. The main funeral home is a sprawling adobe structure built in the 1940s, designed to blend with the natural landscape of piñon pines and juniper trees. The architecture is distinctly southwestern, earth-toned stucco walls, exposed wooden beams, and large windows that frame the distant mountains. During the day, Moonrise bustles with the quiet activity of grief management. Funeral directors meet with families, memorial services are held in the main chapel, and the administrative staff handles the complex logistics of death. But at night, after the last mourners have driven away and the staff has locked up, the place transforms into something entirely different. Peaceful, yes, but also profoundly solitary in ways that can feel either meditative or unsettling, depending on your state of mind. Learning the rhythms of death, my supervisor was Isabella Montoya, the night operations coordinator, who'd been with Moonrise for 15 years. She was in her mid-50s, a compact woman with steel gray hair and the kind of practical efficiency that comes from managing logistics in a business where timing is everything. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, "on my first night in October 2021, Carlos told me about your background, and I want you to know that what you did before doesn't matter here. You're Elena, the custodian now, and that's a job that deserves respect. We take care of people during the most difficult times of their lives, and keeping this place clean and dignified is part of that care." Isabella showed me around the facility during my first week. The main level housed 6 viewing rooms, each decorated in soothing earth tones with comfortable seating for family members. The centerpiece was the great room, a large chapel that could accommodate services for up to 200 people. Upstairs were administrative offices, a family consultation suite, and a small kitchen where staff could prepare refreshments for services. The basement level was where the real work of the funeral home took place. This was the domain of Esperanza S.B. Gutierrez, the head mortician and embalming specialist who'd been practicing her craft for 32 years. SB was an artist in her field. She could make someone who died in a traumatic accident look peaceful and natural, giving families the gift of final memories unmarred by suffering. SB usually works days, Isabella explained as we toured the basement, but sometimes she stays late when we have complex cases or a backup of bodies. The prep rooms and cold storage are her territory. You're responsible for cleaning the hallways, the family viewing area down here, and the staff break room, but you don't enter the actual preparation rooms unless SB specifically asks for help. The cold storage area could hold up to 12 bodies in temperature-controlled units. The preparation rooms were sterile, clinical spaces equipped with everything needed for embalming, cosmetic work, and dressing. There was also a smaller room used for cremation preparation and a receiving area where bodies were brought in from hospitals, hospices, or private residences. My duties were straightforward: sanitize and clean all public areas, vacuum carpets, polish floors, dust furniture, arrange chairs in viewing rooms, maintain the chapel, empty trash bins, and do light security checks throughout the building. The work was methodical and solitary, exactly what I needed to process the wreckage of my former life. For the first 3 months, the routine was almost therapeutic. I'd arrive at 11:45 p.m., get my assignment sheet from Isabella, and begin my rounds. I'd start on the upper level, work my way down to the main floor, and finish in the basement. By 3 a.m., the building would be completely quiet, except for the soft hum of climate control systems and the occasional settling sounds of the adobe structure. Working nights at a funeral home gave me a unique perspective on death that my medical training hadn't provided. In the ER, death was the enemy, something to be fought, prevented, delayed at all costs. At Moonrise, death was simply the beginning of a different kind of care. Families needed time to grieve, to say goodbye, to find meaning in loss. My job was to maintain the dignity of that process, to ensure that when morning came, everything would be perfect for people experiencing the worst day of their lives. The first anomalies, January 2022, brought an unusually heavy caseload to Moonrise Memorial Gardens. A COVID surge, combined with flu season and several tragic accidents, meant we were handling more bodies than usual. SB was working longer hours, often staying until 1 or 2 a.m. to keep up with preparations for the next day's services. That's when I started noticing things that didn't fit the normal patterns I'd learned to expect. It began with the temperature fluctuations in the viewing rooms. Each room had individual climate control systems, carefully maintained to keep the environment comfortable for grieving families. Standard protocol was 70 degrees during the day, reduced to 65 degrees overnight to save energy. I'd check and adjust the thermostats during my cleaning rounds, noting the settings on my checklist. But several mornings in late January, I'd find certain rooms had dropped to as low as 52 degrees overnight, cold enough that I could see my breath. The first time it happened, I assumed it was a malfunction and called maintenance. They checked the system thoroughly and found nothing wrong. All the equipment is functioning normally. The technician told Isabella, the thermostats are working, the heating elements are fine, and there's no indication of any mechanical problems. When it happened again 3 days later, in a different viewing room, Isabella had the entire HVAC system inspected by a different company. Same result. Everything was working perfectly. No explanation for the temperature drops. Then there were the floral arrangements. Moonrise's protocol was strict about maintaining the dignity and arrangement of memorial displays. Flowers were positioned according to family wishes and funeral director specifications, and they were not to be moved except for specific maintenance needs. But starting in early February, I'd arrive for my shift to find that arrangements in certain viewing rooms had been rearranged overnight, not disturbed or knocked over, deliberately repositioned. Roses moved from one side of a casket to the other. Lily arrangements rotated to face different directions. Entire displays shifted to create different geometric patterns. The first few times, Isabella assumed family members were making adjustments during private viewing hours, but then it started happening in rooms that had been locked overnight, rooms where no one was supposed to have access, except emergency personnel. Elena, Isabella said one morning in mid-February, reviewing my checklist, room 4 was locked at 6 p.m. yesterday. You're telling me the flower arrangements were completely different when you cleaned it at 2 a.m. Not completely different, I explained, but definitely rearranged. The standing sprays had been moved to create a semicircle around the casket instead of the linear arrangement that was there during yesterday's viewing, and the personal flowers from family members were grouped by color, rather than the random placement I'd seen before. Isabella frowned. That room was locked. I locked it myself. You have the only night key. I didn't rearrange anything, I said. I just noted it on the checklist because it was different from what I expected based on previous nights. The most unsettling anomaly was the sounds from the basement level. Around 2:30 a.m., usually while I was cleaning the main chapel, I'd hear what sounded like equipment running in the preparation rooms. Not the constant hum of the cooling units, which I'd learned to tune out, but the specific sounds of embalming equipment, pumps, ventilation systems, the metallic clanking of instruments. The first time it happened, I assumed SB had stayed late and was working on a case. But when I checked the parking lot, her car wasn't there. When I mentioned it to Isabella, she confirmed that all preparation work was supposed to be completed by 10 p.m. unless there was a specific emergency. The prep rooms are locked overnight, Isabella explained. SB has the only keys, and she's very strict about securing everything before she leaves. Nothing should be running down there, except the cooling systems. But the sounds continued, always around the same time, always lasting about 20 minutes before stopping abruptly. I started timing them, noting the exact duration and characteristics in my daily reports. Isabella forwarded my observations to SB, who insisted that all equipment was properly shut down and secured every night. February 28, 2022. The setup, the night that changed everything, began with what seemed like a routine emergency admission. I arrived at Moonrise at 11:30 p.m. to find unusual activity in the parking lot. 2 vehicles I didn't recognize and lights on in areas that were normally dark by that time. Isabella met me at the staff entrance, her usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious stress. "We've got a complex situation tonight, Elena. Emergency transfer from the state medical examiner's office in Albuquerque. 3 bodies from a car accident that happened this morning. A family. The ME's office is backed up, and the family specifically requested Moonrise handle the preparations." She handed me a modified checklist. "SB's here tonight, working on the cases. She'll probably be here until 3 or 4 a.m. I need you to be extra careful about noise levels and stay clear of the basement until she gives you the all clear." This wasn't unusual. Emergency cases sometimes required extended hours, and I'd worked around late night preparations before. What was unusual was Isabella's demeanor. In 4 months of working together, I'd never seen her this tense. "Is everything okay?" I asked. Isabella paused, seeming to consider how much to tell me. "Elena, these weren't normal accident fatalities. The ME's preliminary report indicated some unusual circumstances surrounding the deaths. Nothing criminal, just medically complex. SB requested these cases specifically because of her experience with difficult preparations." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "As someone with medical training, I'm sure you understand that some deaths are more challenging to prepare than others. Just, if you hear anything unusual tonight, or if SB needs assistance, she knows about your background." I started my cleaning routine on the 2nd floor, working more quietly than usual out of respect for SB's concentration on the cases below. The building felt different that night, more charged, somehow, as if the very air was holding its breath. At 1:45 a.m., I was cleaning the main chapel when I heard SB's voice coming from the basement. She seemed to be talking to someone, though I knew she was supposed to be working alone. The tone was conversational but strained, as if she was explaining something complicated to a colleague. By 2:15 a.m., I could hear equipment running in the basement, not the usual 20-minute anomaly I'd been documenting, but continuous operation that suggested active preparation work. This made sense given the emergency cases, so I continued my routine without concern. At 2:45 a.m., I heard footsteps on the basement stairs, heavy, deliberate steps, but moving slowly, as if the person was carrying something, or was simply exhausted from hours of detailed work. SB appeared in the main hallway, and I was shocked by her appearance. In the 4 months I'd known her, SB Gutierrez had always been the picture of professional composure, neat, efficient, completely in control of her domain. But the woman I saw that night looked like she'd been through a medical emergency herself. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her surgical scrubs were stained with what looked like embalming fluid, and her face was pale in a way that made her look almost ill. Most disturbing was her expression, a mixture of confusion, fear, and something I could only describe as awe. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, using my formal title for the first time since we'd met, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer as a physician, not as a custodian." This was completely outside the normal boundaries of our professional relationship. In 4 months, SB had been polite, but distant, clearly preferring to maintain the hierarchy between the skilled mortician and the night cleaning staff. But now she was looking at me with the expression of someone who desperately needed a medical consultation. "What is it, SB?" She glanced around the empty hallway, then moved closer, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "In your medical experience, how long after death would you expect all cellular activity to cease completely?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean cellular activity?" "I mean biological processes, cell regeneration, tissue repair, blood circulation." She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Dr. Vasquez, I've been doing this work for 32 years. I know exactly what to expect when I begin preparations on a body that's been deceased for 18 hours. But what I'm dealing with downstairs," she trailed off, staring at me with an expression that was equal parts professional consultation and personal plea for help. "SB, after death, biological processes follow predictable patterns: cell death, rigor mortis, algal mortis, liver mortis. Everything follows established timelines. There's no reversal, no regeneration. That's medically impossible. That's what I've believed for 3 decades. She said quietly. "That's what my training taught me, what my experience has confirmed thousands of times. But Dr. Vasquez, I need you to see what's happening down there. As a physician, I need your professional opinion on something that doesn't fit any medical explanation I can think of." She gestured toward the basement stairs. "These 3 bodies from the accident, they should be showing normal post-mortem changes. They should be ready for standard preparation procedures. But instead," she paused, and I could see her hands trembling slightly. "Instead they seem to be healing." Every instinct I had as a physician demanded that I help her understand whatever medical phenomenon she was observing. But I was also acutely aware that my medical license was still under review, and any unauthorized practice could destroy what little chance I had of eventually returning to medicine. "SB, you know I can't officially." "This isn't official," she interrupted. "This is one professional asking another for help understanding something that shouldn't be possible. Please, in 32 years of mortuary science, I've never encountered anything like this." At 3:17 a.m. on February 28, 2022, I followed Esperanza Gutierrez down the basement stairs of Moonrise Memorial Gardens. I thought I was going to help explain some unusual preservation phenomenon, or provide insight into post-mortem medical conditions that might be outside a mortician's expertise. I had no idea I was about to witness something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the boundary between life and death, and force me to confront the possibility that some mysteries are beyond the reach of medical science. Hasha was a night janitor at a funeral home, but one night still haunts me. Part 2, Final #, The Impossible Discovery. The basement of Moonrise Memorial Gardens had always felt clinical and sterile, but as I followed SB down those stairs at 3:17 a.m., the air itself seemed different, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. The fluorescent lights hummed louder than usual, casting harsh shadows that seemed to move independently of our footsteps. SB led me past the cold storage units to preparation room 2, the largest of the 3 embalming suites. She paused at the door, her hand trembling slightly on the handle. Dr. Vasquez, in 32 years I've prepared over 8,000 bodies. I know exactly what to expect at every stage of the process. What you're about to see, it shouldn't be possible. She opened the door, and I stepped into what can only be described as a scene that defied every principle of medicine and biology I'd learned in 18 years of practice. 3 bodies lay on preparation tables, a man, woman, and teenage girl who I assumed were the family from the car accident Isabella had mentioned, but these weren't the typical post-mortem cases I'd expected to see. The man, who appeared to be in his 40s, should have shown signs of rigor mortis, pallor mortis, and the beginning stages of decomposition after 18 hours. Instead, his skin had a healthy pink tone. His chest was rising and falling in what looked like slow, deep breathing. Most impossibly, a deep laceration across his forehead, clearly from the accident, was visibly healing as I watched, the edges of the wound slowly knitting together. The woman, presumably his wife, had suffered what looked like severe facial trauma from the crash, but as I examined her, the swelling was reducing in real time. Bruises were fading from purple to yellow to normal skin tone, and broken bones in her cheek were somehow repositioning themselves with soft clicking sounds. The teenage girl showed the most dramatic changes. She had apparently suffered massive internal injuries, evidenced by the surgical incisions from the medical examiner's autopsy, but those incisions were closing on their own, the skin reforming without scars, as if her body was rewinding the trauma that had killed her. SB, I whispered, my medical training struggling to process what I was seeing. How long have they been like this? It started about 2 hours after I began initial preparations, she said, her voice barely audible. I was following standard procedures, arterial injection, cavity treatment, positioning, but instead of the normal preservation process, they began reversing. I approached the man's table, checking for vital signs with the clinical detachment that had served me through countless medical emergencies. That nothing had prepared me for this. His pulse was slow but strong, about 40 beats per minute. His skin was warm to the touch. His pupils responded to light. This is medically impossible, I said, more to myself than to SB. These people were pronounced dead by the medical examiner. They've been deceased for nearly 20 hours. Cellular death is irreversible. That's what I thought, SB replied. But look at this. She showed me her preparation notes, meticulously documented as always. Photos taken at the beginning of her work showed typical accident victims, traumatic injuries, post-mortem pallor, the unmistakable stillness of death. But the timestamps on her later photos showed a progression that shouldn't exist in nature. Hour 1. Standard post-mortem appearance. Hour 2, slight improvement in skin tone. Hour 3, visible wound healing begins. Hour 4, internal injuries, showing signs of repair. Hour 5, what I was witnessing now. Have you taken vital signs? I asked. I don't have the equipment for that. I'm a mortician, not a medical professional. But Dr. Vasquez, she paused, looking at me with an expression of desperate hope. Are they alive? That was the question that haunted me. Every diagnostic skill I possessed said these people were exhibiting signs of life, slow but measurable vital signs, healing processes, even what appeared to be REM sleep patterns in their closed eyes. But they had been legally pronounced dead, had undergone medical examiner autopsies, and had been deceased for nearly a full day. I spent the next hour conducting the most surreal medical examination of my career, using basic diagnostic tools that SB had for routine preparation work. I confirmed what seemed impossible. All 3 individuals showed measurable life signs. Heart rates between 35-45 beats per minute, blood pressure readings in the low normal range, brain activity evidenced by pupil responses and apparent dream states. Most incredibly, their injuries continued to heal as I watched. The teenage girl's autopsy incisions had completely closed by 4:30 a.m. The woman's facial trauma was nearly resolved. The man's forehead laceration had become nothing more than a thin pink line. SB, I said finally, We need to call for medical transport. If these people are somehow alive, they need to be in a hospital, not a funeral home. But as I reached for my phone to call emergency services, something extraordinary happened. The man's eyes opened, not the vacant, unfocused stare of someone emerging from unconsciousness, but the clear, alert gaze of someone who had been awake and aware for some time. He looked directly at me, then at SB, and then spoke in a voice that was quiet but perfectly coherent. "Thank you for taking care of us," he said. "We know this is difficult to understand." SB stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of instruments. In 32 years of mortuary work, she had never had a prepared body speak to her. "Sir," I said, falling back on my medical training, "you've been in an accident. We need to get you to a hospital immediately." He smiled gently, the expression of someone who was completely at peace. "Dr. Vasquez, we appreciate your concern, but that's not necessary. We're exactly where we need to be." The woman's eyes opened next, followed by the teenagers. All three sat up slowly, moving with the careful deliberation of people who had experienced significant trauma but were no longer in pain. "We know this is confusing," the woman said, her voice carrying the same otherworldly calm as her husband's. "We died in that accident this morning. We were gone for several hours, but we were given a choice." "What kind of choice?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "To come back long enough to say goodbye properly," the teenage girl said, "to let our family know we're okay, that death isn't what people think it is. We've been aware of everything, your care, your confusion, your kindness in trying to help us." Over the next 2 hours, the three family members, Robert, Maria, and Sofia Morales, shared an experience that challenged everything I thought I knew about death and consciousness. They described a period of separation from their bodies, a realm of peace and understanding, and then a deliberate choice to return temporarily to ease their family's grief. They weren't zombies or supernatural beings. They were conscious, articulate people who had died and returned with full knowledge of both experiences. They answered detailed questions about their accident, their lives, and their deaths with perfect accuracy, information later verified by police reports and medical examiner findings. As dawn approached, they began to fade again, not dramatically, but with the same gradual process I'd witnessed in reverse during the night. Their vital signs slowly decreased, their skin gradually took on the pallor of death, and their awareness gently diminished. "Thank you," Robert said as his eyes closed for the final time, "for believing in something impossible." By 7 a.m., when the day staff began arriving, 3 normal post-mortem bodies lay on the preparation table. SB and I were left with our memories, her detailed photographic documentation, and the profound knowledge that death might not be the absolute boundary we'd always believed it to be. The aftermath. I submitted my resignation from Moonrise Memorial Gardens the following week, not because of fear or trauma, but because I couldn't continue working around death, knowing what I now knew about the possibility of consciousness beyond clinical death. The experience forced me to reconsider everything: my medical training, my understanding of consciousness, my assumptions about what happens when we die. I began reading extensively about near-death experiences, consciousness studies, and cases of unexplained recoveries. 6 months later, I started a small practice focused on palliative care and death counseling, helping families navigate end-of-life decisions with a perspective informed by what I'd witnessed that night. I couldn't tell them about the Morales family, but I could approach death with less fear and more openness to possibilities beyond current medical understanding. SB quit mortuary work a month after that night and became a hospice counselor. We stay in touch, 2 professionals whose careers were forever changed by witnessing something that shouldn't have been possible. The Morales family was buried 3 days later, after a beautiful memorial service attended by hundreds of people who had no idea their loved ones had returned for one final night to demonstrate that death might not be an ending, but a transition to something we don't yet understand. That night at Moonrise Memorial Gardens taught me that medicine, for all its advances and certainty, still contains profound mysteries. It reminded me that the boundary between life and death might be far more complex and permeable than we currently comprehend. Some nights, I still wake up at 3 a.m., remembering their voices, their gratitude, and their absolute peace with both life and death. It's the kind of memory that changes everything you thought you knew about what it means to be alive.